Hello, Alpha here, and welcome back to another video on Promise of Peace. And in this video, I want to share with you my personal testimony or my personal experience of how God answered my prayer in a miraculous way. And, hoping that with this experience, you may be encouraged and reminded that God still hears and answers prayer because maybe you've been praying for something for a while now, or maybe you're thinking about trying prayer so this video is really to encourage you and remind you that God hears your prayer and he answers, because if he does it for me, then he can do it for you also. And so my experience happened not long ago when I was in my undergrad, and there was a student missionary program there where as students we would get together in groups and we would go out on missionary trips. So it was really a Christian salesman missionary program. So what we would do, we would travel to different places and we would sell spiritual or Christian literatures. And after doing that, we would also offer, prayers for the people who buy our books. We would tell them more about God and so on. And so from the sales of our Christian book, that would actually lead to us, getting a scholarship or getting the finances to pay our universities. And so at the time, I wasn't using scholarship or I wasn't using student loan or anything like that. I was literally paying my way through school. And so I needed to work to be able to accumulate the funds to pay for my studies. And so what I would do is that in the summers, I would go on this Christian missionary program. And at the end of the summer, praying and hoping that God would actually bless me through that summer, which was just 3 months. And then I would be able to accumulate enough to pay for my studies by doing God's work at the same time. So I really love the idea because I was able to do God's work, and at the same time I was able to generate enough income also for my studies. And so this one time we went on this missionary program. And the dynamic of the missionary program is that the program itself, it pays for your flight and it pays for your accommodation and everything. But then at the end of the program, they will actually subtract that away from what you would have made. So all the expenses that they covered for you, they would subtract it from what you would have made at the end of the summer. And so you really had to work hard to be able to accumulate enough, not only to pay for your expenses, but also to pay for your studies when the school year starts again. So this time we went as a group, and it's just 3 months that we have literally in the summer to generate, all the income that we need, and also to get that spiritual experience. And so there I was, starting to work in the summer. It was my first time. Never had much experience, but I was really enjoying the program. But as I was working and working and working, I was just not making much sales. And a lot of the other students around me, they were making really good sales. And I was like, God, what's going on? And that was one of the time. In fact, I think that was the time when I prayed most in my, walk with God. I was praying so much, throughout that summer because I really needed to go back to school and being able to pay for my studies. Because if I wasn't able to pay for my studies when I go back, then I would have to sit out the semester or even sit out the entire year because I wouldn't have enough finances. And so I was praying and I was praying. I was like, God, please, I need you to bless me this summer. I need you to open doors for me so that I can be able to pay for my studies. And nothing was happening. I was praying and praying and praying, but just nothing was happening. And I remember coming to into the middle of the summer. And when I look back at my finances, I was like, what's going on? I didn't even make enough to pay for my flight. And I was like, God, if I can't even pay for my flight, for my expenses that I had that needed to be covered right now, then how am I gonna even pay for my studies? And about a month and a half remained in the summer, and I thought to myself, maybe this isn't for me. But one thing I did, I kept praying and I kept praying and I kept believing and I kept trusting and I kept hoping that God was going to do something. And, I didn't lose faith, but it was becoming more and more difficult. And when it was seeming more and more impossible, but I didn't lose faith because I already believed and I know what God is capable of doing. And so here we are, 2 months went by, and I still didn't make enough to cover the expenses where we were staying and my flight. And I thought to myself, that's it. That's it. This is not happening. When I go back to school, I'm not going to be able to pay for my studies. And I kept praying. That was all I had. I kept praying, and I thought I needed to work harder also. So I was practicing my sales skills more, and I was trying and trying and trying and trying, but my sales, they were just not increasing. But then when I look at the other students, most of them were doing really well, and so I thought maybe this was me. I thought, maybe something was happening, and so it went on, and I got to the point where I really, literally, I would like to say that I literally gave up. Not giving up on what God is able to do, but giving up on what I was doing, throughout that summer. Because I was literally working hard. I was working hard. I was working hard. I was walking fast, going to different people as fast as I can, doing all the different training techniques that I was taught, and it was just not working out for me. And so I got to the point where I felt like, hey, this is not happening. So I literally kind of gave up, and I was like, God, you know what, I'm just gonna rest this completely in your hands, because this is not happening for me. And I got to the point where I thought to myself, I said, you know what, since I'm not doing well on the sales part, I'm just gonna forget about that. I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna tell people about God. I'm just gonna pray for people. I'm just gonna be available for people who want to know more about Jesus. And whatever happens after that, it's all in God's hand. I'm just gonna keep praying, and I'm just gonna do whatever I can. But I'm done. I'm done. And so I literally got to that broken point where I felt like nothing was happening. And so here I was, 2 weeks remaining to go. The summer was almost over, and at the end of and at the end of the summer, I remember I prayed and I said to God, look, I'm done. I'm done. I'm done trying things on my own. I was praying, but I felt like I was also overworking myself, and I felt like I took things really into my own hands, because I felt like I needed to do something, I don't know, extraordinary. And I was like, God, you know what? I remember I went down on my knees and I cried, because I got to the point where I felt like, hey, this is not happening. When I go back to school, I'm not going to be able to pay for my studies. And I cried and I said, Lord, I felt like you called me for this. And I felt like I am here, doing your will. And and so there is nothing else I can do. And so I'm going to leave it totally into your hands. I'm giving it totally into your hands, God, because now the summer is almost over. I don't see anything happening. So it's all up to you. What I'm going to do from now on, I'm just going to go, and I'm just going to tell people about Jesus, and that's it. The rest is up to you. And that was my turning point. Just 2 weeks, 2 weeks remaining in that summer. And I remember we changed working location, and we went on a long drive to about 6 hours away, 6 hours drive to a new area. And in that area, we stayed there for 2 weeks, working on the final closing moment of the program. Just 2 weeks to go. And I remember start talking to people about God, and just offering people, hey, would you like me to pray for you? And people were just being really, really appreciative of me praying for them and just being there. And I got to the point where I totally almost like forgot about the book completely, because I was like, you know what, I'm broken. I can't do this anymore. And I was like, I'm just gonna do God's work, and it's up to God. And I just want to say to you that, hey, in that last 2 weeks, when I decided to give it all to God, and I was just praying and asking God to use me, something happened. Something happened that shocked me. And what happened was that only in 2 weeks, God did something for me that throughout the entire summer never happened. And that was how I actually knew and realized that it was also God doing a miracle in my life, because that's how God works also. When God is going to do a miracle, sometimes He actually waits. Sometimes He delays and He delays and He delays, and He waits until the point where it becomes humanly impossible. And when it becomes humanly impossible, then that's when God steps in. And He does that because He really wants us to give Him all the glory. He wants it to be beyond doubt, so that we can know beyond doubt that this was God's hand in our lives, that this is God working. And that's why He works that way. Because when it's beyond doubt that this is no longer human, then now we are able, then we get into the spot where we are now able to give God all the glory and say, God, I praise you because you did this. Friends, in that last 2 weeks of the program, something happened that shocked me. Almost every single person that I talked to, my books were just going out and just going out and just going out like crazy. And I wasn't doing anything different. The only thing I was doing different was praying more and focusing more on God's work. And I have to say, the most important thing was that I literally just gave the control totally in God's hand. Long story short, in only 2 weeks, God was able to bless me with so much sales that was able to cover for my entire year of studying that school year. Not only my studies expenses, but also to pay my rent, but also to take care of transportation expenses, to take care of food and everything. At the end of that summer, when I went back to school, I was able to take care of all my university expenses. And that was because in 2 weeks, God did something for me that never happened in 3 long months, something that I was trying to do on my own for 3 months. In 2 weeks, God was able to do that. And it was such a huge blessing for me and a huge turning point for me also, because as I spoke to the people, people were just accepting taking my books like crazy. People were buying, books in great numbers, and I was like, what is happening, and all I could do was to really give God the glory. And so this experience really, family, is to encourage you and let you know that, hey, when you put things completely in God's hand, when you rest something completely in God's hand and you allow Him to take control, then if He does it for me, He can do it for you also. And so if you've been praying for a long time, if you've been hoping, and wanting to try prayer for a situation that you're going through, then I want to remind you that, hey, God still hears and answers prayer, because if He does it for me, He can do it for you too. If this experience encouraged you, then I invite you to go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you can receive more blessing like this. And also, I would appreciate if you hit that thumbs up button also and leave a comment below. Maybe you've had an experience where God answered your prayer in a miraculous way. And so I'd love to hear your experience also. So leave it in the comment section below. So thank you for joining, and see you on the next video. God bless.